They didn't run, because there was no reason to. The morning in Pompeii began like any other. Lucius woke before the sun had fully reached over the eastern hills, the light already warm against the walls of his small courtyard house. The air carried the usual smells: baked bread from a nearby oven, damp stone, olive oil, and faint traces of animals being led through the streets. Nothing felt wrong. That was the strange part. Pompeii was alive in the quiet, structured way all Roman towns were. Shop doors opened, water splashed into basins, voices carried through narrow streets. A cart rolled past, its wooden wheels grinding softly against the stones. Lucius stepped into the courtyard and poured water over his hands. Above the rooftops, Mount Vesuvius stood still. Everyone knew the mountain. It was simply there, a backdrop to daily life. It had vineyards on its slopes, and older people sometimes mentioned that it had once been active, though no one living had ever seen it do anything unusual. To Lucius, it was just a mountain. Inside, his wife, Flavia, was preparing bread. "You're up early," she said, not looking away from her work. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "That's because you think too much." He smiled. She said that often. Their son Marcus was still asleep in the corner, wrapped loosely in a blanket, one arm thrown across his face. Lucius stepped out into the street. The stones were already warm. A neighbor was sweeping dust away from his doorway. Another man was opening a small shop, arranging jars and tools with careful precision. "Market today?" the neighbor asked. Lucius nodded. "If I can get there before the crowds." "You won't," the man said with a grin. "You never do." They both laughed. A few minutes later, Lucius noticed something. A faint tremor. Not strong, barely enough to shift a hanging cup against the wall. In Pompeii, that was not unusual. The region often felt small movements beneath the ground. People noticed them, commented briefly, and moved on. Lucius did the same. He glanced at the mountain again. Still quiet, still ordinary, still part of the world as it had always been. By mid-morning, the town was busy. The forum filled with people trading goods and news. Bakers worked faster as demand grew. Street vendors called out prices. Children ran through the alleys. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into the stones. Then, sometime after midday, everything changed. At first, it was not sound. It was shadow. Lucius noticed it slowly, the way one notices a cloud passing across the sun. The light dimmed. People began looking upward. And there it was. A column rising from the mountain. Not smoke as from a fire. Something larger, darker, expanding as it climbed into the sky. For a moment, no one moved. No one shouted, because no one understood. At first, it looked like dust. Fine, gray particles drifting down through the air, settling on rooftops, shoulders, market tables. Some people laughed. Others brushed it away with mild annoyance. Lucius held out his hand. The ash collected across his palm like soft powder. "From the mountain?" someone said. "Just wind," another replied. People continued moving. That was the nature of a city. Even when something unusual happened, daily life resisted interruption. Bread still needed to be sold. Water still needed to be carried. Conversations continued, though now they turned more often toward the sky. The column above Vesuvius grew higher. It spread outward, forming a shape unlike anything most had seen, a towering plume, wide at the top, casting a long shadow across the land. By early afternoon, the ash thickened. Roofs began to gather a visible layer. The streets lost their usual color. Footsteps left deeper marks. The air became drier, heavier, slightly harder to breathe. Lucius returned home. Flavia had already brought Marcus inside. "What is happening?" she asked. "I don't know." That was the truth. No one knew. There were no warnings, no signals that this was danger of a different kind. Earthquakes had happened before, small eruptions in distant memory. But this was unfamiliar. Outside, the sound began. A distant, continuous rumble. Not sharp like thunder. Deeper. Constant. Lucius stepped into the street again. More ash. Faster now. Some people had begun covering their heads with cloth. Others carried belongings. A few were leaving the city entirely, moving toward the roads that led away from the mountain. But many stayed. Because leaving a city was not simple. Homes, goods, family members, obligations, everything tied a person to place. And still, the danger was not yet clear. There was no fire racing through the streets, no wave of destruction. Only ash, only sound, only uncertainty. By late afternoon, small stones began to fall. Pumice, light enough to hold, heavy enough to hurt. They struck roofs with hollow impacts. They bounced along the ground. Some shattered on contact. Others remained whole, scattered across streets like strange pale fruit. Marcus picked one up. "It's warm," he said. Flavia took it from him immediately. "Inside," she said. The sky darkened further. It was no longer the color of evening. It was something else entirely. By evening, Pompeii had changed beyond recognition. The streets were no longer streets. They were paths through falling stone. Pumice now covered the ground in layers. Walking required effort. Each step sank slightly. The air filled with particles that scratched the throat and eyes. People wrapped cloth around their faces. Voices became harder to hear. Lucius stood in the doorway of his house, watching. The column above the mountain still rose, though now it seemed to pulse dark waves pushing upward then spreading outward. The rumble had become constant. Inside, Flavia gathered what she could. "We should leave," she said. Lucius hesitated, not because he wanted to stay, but because leaving meant choosing a direction without knowing which was safe. Many had already gone. Some toward the sea, some inland, some simply following others. Marcus stood close to them, silent now, no longer curious. The city's usual sounds had disappeared. No vendors, no laughter, only movement and falling stone. They stepped into the street. Around them, people moved in all directions, carrying bags, leading children, calling to one another. Some struggled under the weight of falling debris. Others paused, unsure where to go. The ash fell thicker. The stones fell harder. Time began to lose its shape. Night came early, but not as darkness, as absence of light. Torches appeared, flickering against gray air. Shadows moved strangely, distorted by the haze. The city felt smaller, narrower, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Then, sometime in the deepening dark, the air changed again. Hotter, heavier, more difficult to breathe. Lucius felt it first as pressure in his chest. A warning without words. Somewhere in the distance, beyond sight, something had begun to descend from the mountain. They never saw it clearly. Those who survived later would describe it as a cloud, but not like any cloud they had known. It moved fast, too fast. A surge of superheated gas, ash, and fragments what we now understand as a pyroclastic flow racing down the slopes of Vesuvius. By the time it reached Pompeii, there was no time left to react. Lucius had just turned to speak to Flavia. Marcus was beside her. The air was already too hot, too dense, too sudden. There was no dramatic final moment, no long realization, no speech, just impact, heat beyond anything the body could withstand, air that could not be breathed, a force that overtook the city in seconds. Pompeii did not fall slowly. It stopped, Exactly where people stood, exactly as they moved, exactly as they tried to understand. Years later, when others returned, they did not find a ruined city. They found a preserved one, rooms still arranged, objects still in place, people frozen in their final positions, their shapes captured in hardened ash. Not because they chose to stay, but because they never had the chance to leave. And that is the truth history leaves behind. Pompeii was not destroyed in chaos. It was interrupted. A single day, moving forward like any other. Until it didn't.